Alright, so most of my research revolved around, like, as a child, I had a first-hand experience with what satanic sex slaving is. And essentially, it followed a procedure that came out of the MK Ultra project. Okay, so then they have I post shit tons of very credible sites on this type of stuff. Okay, I put them all into one little package. But around here, when somebody, because they're always voyeurs talking. They're always looking at my screenshots and shit. Okay? And it like feeds in. They like instantly, he went to this side. And that's how they are. And then they're like always waiting for this kind of stuff because it feeds into their procedure about calling somebody crazy and shit. Okay? It's pretty typical of what their little procedure on this stuff is. So, these sites, most of these sites are usually it's like some Tea Party Nazi kind of guy. Okay, most of the time it is, that builds these sites on the Monarch sex kitten beta programming type of stuff. Okay, so Project Monarch is essentially a part of the Project MK Ultra. The M actually refers to Monarch, and that the K refers to a specialized satanic sex slaving called Prince. So I'll just show you what that is. That. And then there's extra stuff. There's extra stuff and extra scars that represent that stuff. And that there may or may not be people nowadays that have those anymore. But in the past, the MK Ultra victims were marked with these scars. And like I said, there's a little one right there. But it always happens when they're as children. I have one on the end of my penis. It essentially is a little spot, a dot on the end of my penis. And then there's also a scar on my butthole. So, that is where, essentially, what people may not realize is that the beta programming, okay? So, basically, the problems that they do this stuff in S&M, they do. And so, essentially what you'll get is, basically, here is how to look at, there's differences in the beta programming. The stuff that they do on a guy is meant to make them fuck witch. Okay? And that then, essentially this process, when done to the witch, usually stifles their sexual prowess. And then this site refers to, that uses beta is referred to as sexual programming. This programming eliminates all learned moral convictions and stimulates the primitive instinct devoid of inhibitions. And so essentially what they do is they build a whole series of vaginal stimulations on the witch, and that over time triggers, psychosomatically trigger a sexual horniness in the witch. This process turns them into a very authoritative woman. This process, basically this process, when they do this to little girls, makes them command people around. And that with that process essentially causes them to shut down sexually, and that this is then the next phase that they do to them that rebuilds the sexual horniness in them. So when it comes to theta, this is the type of stuff that then essentially this is somewhat of what the sinister kind of aspects that has them expecting control, and that then utilizing sex to control people. And then if that doesn't work, then they build somewhat of a sinister psychological breakdown. This process essentially causes them to be the type of woman that knows how to break down somebody psychologically. It would be like a witch that builds up a bunch of love and stuff just to crush Mopey in his fucking face for not being a man. It like builds up their little infatuated pettiness kind of problem, and then they think that they're like better than somebody, and then it crushes them. And that's essentially the theoretical ideas on what that is supposed to produce if done correctly, okay? So then essentially this falls into a similar idea where this is meant to be like a master command kind of idea in the little boy, basically. And that then, just like this, it's a different sex slaving procedure. Essentially, it utilizes the same kind of ideas, but it's different. And so this essentially turns them into what I call dumb cuckolder, which is the older term for that, or cuckolder. And or cuckolding wizard knight. I mean, this is cuckolding wizard knight. But that this process essentially somewhat deadens their sexual prowess unless they're with a witch. And so with that, this process essentially operates on a similar kind of idea of rebuilding a sexual stimulation trigger. And this is like, if you looked at my meta, you might notice that in the past I was whacking off all the time. As I started to break down the amnesias, this type of stuff started causing a little more sexual prowess in me than I would just handle myself, okay? And that it tends to become like a sexual horniness that, until satisfied, becomes a problem. And that is where I figured out years and years of how to suppress that back down, because when I was married, the witch would be witching at me, and it would make me want to fuck witch all the time, okay? And that would have been one of her little whiny little problems with me. But she knew that I wanted to fuck witch all the time, huh? And that's what she knows. Fuck witch. So this stuff, this theta stuff, this involves basically the wizard abilities to do psychoping on military personnel. That's what that produces. It produces the output psychologically produce an awareness that then has the person going to the shadows, so to speak, when certain things start to happen. These represent somewhat of the psychological building aspects to the psyche from that stuff. Then you have delta. Delta is, well, the special force does a diametric delta to the typical delta sex slaving. See these black ops special force guys that hold each other down and rape each other. They're doing delta. Okay? That happens. And that when I say jackal, when they jackal people through an S&M, they're actually doing this. And that the process of doing that, in lots of ways, those special force guys that do that for some reason, their special force Navy SEAL kind of training builds their psyche to actually withstand this shit. And that without that, see, part of the Navy SEAL style trainings, like when they're stuck in a swamp and shit, when they do that, what that does is it prevents their psyche from cracking. This process, if your psyche cracks easily, will cause a massive psychological splitting of memories and psychological alters that start to build in the mind. So that is where most people may not realize that if you don't already have like a hardened psyche to psychological cracking from forms of torture and shit, that is like basically what their delta is. This is a different, it's very specialized. It's difficult to explain this because it involves this. It does. And then it also involves this, which is essentially what the MK Ultra, see what they were doing to children hardens their psyche against cracking psychologically. And then once they achieve that, then they start the process of delta, which is well, it's essentially psychopping Green Berets and shit that do that stuff. Basically. And so then Prince, this stuff is essentially once they're able to achieve, because actually the MK Ultra project was about putting every human through all of this. And then if they output as delta, then it moves on to Prince. And that is where I talk about the prairie tree processions. And that's why it's kind of separate from this stuff. And then down here is where essentially this is the psychological, like, the whole process is to build someone up psychologically, not to crack, and then to make the little boy fall in love with the witch and to be protecting the witch, and then in the end for everybody to tear her body apart in front of the little boy's face, and then that causing a massive like psychological anger that cracks the child. And that part of this stuff is hypnotizing people and shit, and basically, and that then they become Satan. And so that is kind of what this stuff is. When it comes to these chicks, this process won't actually split the memory if they're doing the witch. What Satanic S&M does is this to everyone. They do beta man. And see, in Satanic S&M, this is where they start. And then what I call KGB caucus is essentially this. And that the whole idea is that these are specialized to the testosterone aspects of a man. These are specialized to the estrogen aspects of a female. What you'll see is that women that fall into this category will probably be very womanly, lots of estrogen, and that the guys that have actually gone through this type of stuff will probably be people that will be of a higher testosterone rate in their body. And so but see, that stuff comes from childhood. And so what they do to these women, if they start, see, if their eyes like dilate and stuff, and they start like doing weird sex kitten kind of shit, that means that they were getting this stuff. This stuff right here is essentially the witch will just be like authoritative and like a woman, basically. And that then essentially she'll like, the man will get all pissed off by her being a woman about everything, basically. And that then the woman knows how to make him shut up. Basically. That's kind of what it is. And so that is where this is the sexual programming or psychological building that if done, see, if they already have done this S&M shit, then they've already messed up this process. And that you're not supposed to actually do this stuff. But that when it comes to victims and shit, they'll fall into specific categories. See, if you don't start here or here, this stuff is what keeps. See, it prevents the protection altars from building if you do it in the correct way. But see, satanic S&M isn't allowed to be doing this stuff, the alpha stuff. They have to start at beta, sex slave. And that, since it's S&M and stuff, that is where it's all about sex. And to do this process first causes the split psyche, because doing this form of psychological building prevents the psychological splitting when this process starts. So, it's like these blocks mean things, and that satanic S&M does only two, and that they essentially aren't allowed to do art or religion or society, and that they essentially have to do this or this. So these become like what essentially these are I guess worms or something or worms instead of caterpillars, and that these are moths. I mean, that would be the best way. The caterpillar is this, and that in ways the butterfly is like this stuff, and that's basically I guess this would be the caterpillar and this would be the butterfly. But see, that is where they have that stuff done correctly, and that those people will end up being more psychologically sound, even if they were in an S&M club that started doing that stuff. Their psyches will be more prone to red integrating based on childhood abuse like this, that if done correctly prevents, they might exhibit some of the split issues, But they'll eventually, once that stuff stops, they'll eventually start to reintegrate naturally, very easily. And that's the type of sign of the real actual like sex slaving being done in the correct way. See, if they don't bounce back from that stuff, that's where they probably went through some sort of, it's like these people in satanic S&M, they just learn stuff. They don't actually like never really understand this type of stuff. So they do like, you know, it, all the guys that get an alpha sex slaving, they essentially get alpha witch. And then what that basically is a cuck. Somebody that essentially lays on their back, puts their legs and butterflies their legs open for somebody to fuck them in the ass. And then they act like men. And so then they get beta witch a lot of the times. And then these women usually get this type of stuff. And see, they're not necessarily doing it correctly. These sex slavers that do that stuff, nobody talks about it. Everybody's kind of a sociopath that does that sex slaving. Once they find errors, everybody likes to torture everybody in satanic S&M. So it's like the real information isn't necessarily like understood in these ways. They literally ghost idea where they don't tell anybody is used to sex slave the sex slavers because they have like their own internal little battles for that type of stuff. And so that is basically what these sex kitten sites are kind of about. And that some of these people, like, it's like when they say hard mind control, that kind of stuff is like, the reality is that, see, if done correctly, then mind control comes in the form of the witch running command over the wizard, okay? And then, when the witch is done, then the wizard holds command over the witch. That would be where this type of stuff is like keyword triggers, is what the hard mind control is. And that's the type of stuff that triggers from reoccurring abuse in this sexual, psychological slaving building method being done over and over. That stuff causes triggers. These people that sex slave and shit, they like to utilize words that cause a trigger. That is what their hard mind control idea is on that. But there's a real theoretic to what the mind control is. See, it's like, basically, it's like anything smart, wizard, hard mind controls over. And then anything like societal and cultural and stuff like that, stuff that operates outside of like, well, essentially it's like the wizard controls art, society, and science, okay? And then the witch essentially is like in charge of somewhat making decisions about religion and teaching and government and economics and like medical ideas and law ideas. But the wizard takes over when any dumbness comes out. See, it's like the witch. See, if witch chose Buddhism for our family, I wouldn't have to, but the theoretics on this is that that would be her decision. And that when it comes to, like, religion school, that would be her decision, I guess. And then when it comes to, like, being a pseudo-communist, like AOC kind of chick, that would be, see, and then when it comes to government, like pseudo-socialism, AOC style kind of stuff, and then when it comes to like naturalistic medicine kind of ideas, and then when it comes to like, see, she does insider law. So that's where gays and women can't be busted by pedo cop. And so that's where witch is dumb. So that, all right? So this is how I approach this. It wouldn't matter what women I'm with. They don't even have to be this. I'm a wizard. And that I'll stand back and I'll allow them to mold the cuck. All right? Because I don't do that. I don't. I do art, sociology, and science is what I dictate, essentially. And so, but the witch does insider law, so that's done. So that is where then theoretically, I do smart in law. And then the witch was forwarding like ideas of taking pills that go against DNA analysis and stuff. That was dumb. Science. So that's where I take over decisions about medicine. And then the witch was doing like pedo bang Nazi Supercorp online, and that was dumb. That's a slave corp that you don't get any money out of. So then I established the Wizards royalty capitalism methodology of economics. And then the witch, for some reason, seems to be involved with T-Banger World or something nowadays, and so that was done. So then I rework in what would be a socialist commune AOC, liberal capitalist Democrat. And so then the witch wasn't teaching boy in the audio-visual video way. And that was dumb. Because he'll excel leaps and bounds, utilizing my audio-visual video methodologies. He'll excel beyond belief. And so, she was dumb. So that is where I established, I don't force anything on her, okay? This is just how I approach this stuff. I let the witch rule the cuck. And then when she's done about something, then I'm smart. So then, Catholic pedo touch cover-up school, I'm not, that's dumb, okay? Public prairie tree school that would support probably, a teacher would probably not mind having like a little side group that maybe tests out some audio-visual video ideas in a public school to do prairie trees of learning and shit. See, that's where dumb turns into smart. And then woman is supposed to do some art, and then she's supposed to learn about sociology, and then she's supposed to learn some science and shit. And so that's what you do with your kittens. And so it wouldn't matter. I approached all women in the same exact way. Doesn't matter if they're a victim of that shit or not. That's the wizard approach.